This is going to be a very important and informative video. I think it's going to be applicable to all parents, regardless of where you live in the country. But this is going to be specifically about Alabama. Now, you need to go back, look in your state regulations and your laws, because I think that this information, when it comes to seclusion, restraint, mechanical restraints, chemical restraints, all of those things that happen within our public schools, what can you do about it? Are the laws enough, or are they even laws? And that's going to be some of the mind-blowing information that I'm going to provide you with regards to reviewing Alabama's. And I mentioned this before. A lot of this came about toward the tail end of the beginning of the Obama administration, to where it looked like the Congress, the federal Congress, was going to be moving on seclusion and restraint to where we were going to adopt a national policy. And so many of the states, because there are political bodies within the education system, powerful education bodies, to where the lobbying groups sort of undercut that momentum in Congress to create a national seclusion and restraint law, to where many of the states went in and sort of adopted their own. And I'm going to show you what we were working on with regards to proposed rules, and then what we ended up with back in 2009, 2010, right around there. And it's been the same since. So those of you not in Alabama, you need to look at your rules to see if you have them. Most states adopted them because, like I said, it was sort of an end run around Congress, so that Congress didn't do it. And so it unfortunately, in many states, sort of like Alabama, it gives the appearance that something was done, but in reality, I'll show you that nothing was done. The reason being is that things aren't a law unless there's consequences. Okay, you can sit there and write everything on a piece of paper and say, well, these are the rules. Great, but what are the consequences for breaking the rules? And if there are no consequences for breaking the rules, then are they really rules? Now, the problem is the disparity, the power disparity, because obviously you and I, as regular citizens, if we don't follow rules, then they can just sort of make consequences up. If you've ever read a school student code of conduct, for example, at the very end, most of them have a little caveat in there that says that they reserve the right to sit there and make up rules if they don't have any that specifies or meets that narrow scope of whatever your child allegedly did. So they reserve the right to make stuff up. You don't have that right. So when it comes to the seclusion and restraint rule, you're going to find out that it's rules, but what are the consequences? What happens if they don't do it? And that's what needs to change. Because I'm telling you guys, this thing's been in existence for, like I said, 11, 12 years. And it hasn't changed anything. There's rampant abuse. And I can tell you right now, with confidence, that it's been around for so long that I've got crops of teachers, I've got some administrators, and I've got aides especially, that don't even have a clue that this thing's in existence. No idea. No idea that there's rules against the things that they're doing. No idea. Okay, so let's get to it. This is Alabama, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to share it so you guys can have yourself a copy, and I'm going to share the highlighted version because if you notice, there's 38 total pages because this is the Alabama Administrative Code, and so there's other things within it that wouldn't apply to you guys, or I guess it would apply to your children, but what I'm saying is specifically to what we're discussing with regards to seclusion and restraint. So we start with the definitions, and we have chemical restraint. So any medication, for example, it's illegal for them or prohibited in them to sit there and have that as a condition, or to medicate your child, obviously without your consent and without your knowledge. They can't do that. So the use of chemical restraint is prohibited. Okay. So then we move to mechanical restraint. And this is any material or material attached or to adjacent to the student's body intended to restrict normal freedom of movement. Where I see this as a big problem is with, let's say, orthopedic products within a classroom, like let's say a Rifton chair, all right, which is a straight back chair for orthopedic issues that have, let's say, pilot seatbelts. And I've seen many times kids restrained over the years put in those things for no other reason than as a form of restraint. And that is prohibited in Alabama. So then we have physical restraint. And you sit there and you go, okay, physical restraint, it's physical contact from an adult that prevents or significantly restricts the student's movement. And additionally, physical restraint does not include providing limited physical contact, redirection. You can read that. And this is allowed if it's done correctly, using proper training and techniques, things of that nature, okay? What's not allowed is physical restraint that restricts the airflow to the student's lungs. That would be face down, face up, on their side, where physical pressure is applied to the student's body. So let's say sitting on a student. Not a good idea, not allowed, it's prohibited. Got it? Use of this time is prohibited. Okay, so then you have seclusion, and that's really what we're getting into here. A procedure that isolates and confines a student in a separate, locked area until he or she is no longer an immediate danger to himself or herself or others. Seclusion occurs in a specifically constructed or designated room or space that is physically isolated from common areas and from which the student is physically prevented from leaving. Seclusion does not include situations in which a staff member trained in the use of de-escalation techniques or restraint is physically present in the same unlocked room as the student. And then timeout is different. So the use of seclusion is prohibited. Now let me concentrate on this a little bit. A common area is hallways. Common areas wouldn't be necessarily defined as a classroom, okay? And the other thing is you can't have a locking mechanism on the door. And the other thing is if the child is in one of these rooms, there needs to be a staff member trained in the use of de-escalation or techniques physically present in the same unlocked room. It's not timeout. Timeout is different. Got it? Now, what is timeout? Timeout's a behavioral intervention, temporarily removed from a learning environment. It's appropriate when it's non-locked, appropriately lighted, ventilated, heated. Duration of timeout is reasonable in light of the purpose of the timeout and the age of the child. However, each timeout should not exceed 45 minutes. And once again, you're talking about a non-locking setting, okay? That's appropriately lighted, all of those things. Reasonably monitored by the attending adult who is in reasonable physical proximity. The problem with the timeout as opposed to a seclusion room, it's largely semantics, guys, because they can sit there and call things timeout. They can call them cool down spaces. They can call them whatever. But the telling difference is separate locked area, not in a common area. The student is physically prevented from leaving. Okay? A lot of these rooms that I deal with, that I see, that we have pictures of, are physically built into these self-contained special education classrooms. They have locking mechanisms. They might have a little window, but they're padded. But they have locking mechanisms. Guys, these rooms cannot lock. As this says, they are prohibited in Alabama. Yet I see them all the time. Because for it to be okay, it cannot have a locking. The other thing is it's got to be appropriately lighted. The one, for example, that I'm dealing with right now, the report from one of the staff members that was moral and ethical enough to report about what was going on in this classroom would say that they would turn the lights off and that the children would be locked because this particular timeout or the cool down room or whatever, like I think they called it a quiet room, and it was padded, had a locking mechanism. And how do we know it had a locking mechanism? Well, the parents toured this classroom, guys. They toured the classroom. They have video. I've seen the video, and they did a demonstration to where they tried to get out of this room. They could not get out of the room. If you clicked it down, you could lock it, as far as had a locking mechanism on it. And there's just no physical way that any child would be able to get out of that room. And because there was a little bitty window, like I said, they would frequently turn the light off, and it wasn't used for any other reason than an aversive as punishment, as a consequence, causing and creating a psychological trauma and emotional trauma to the students in that class. But technically, guys, it's not supposed to exist, right? It's not supposed to exist, but yet it's there. And I can tell you, this is not an isolated situation. These rooms exist all over the state of Alabama. They exist all over the country. And these schools justify them and say, oh my God, these kids are so violent. We need these rooms. We need these rooms. We need them to be able to lock. And you sit there and say, well, how in the hell do they exist if it says that they're prohibited in the state of Alabama? Well, like I said, this is a little bit longer video, but please stay with me on this. And I will explain to you why. So you have timeout. So here you have the requirements. The use of seclusion is prohibited. Got it? So here we're restating it. Use of physical restraint that it restricts airflow. Prohibited. Use of mechanical restraint. Prohibited. Use of chemical restraint. Prohibited. Use of physical restraint is prohibited, except in those situations in which a student is in an immediate danger to himself or others, and the student is not responsive to less intensive behavioral interventions, including verbal directives and other de-escalation techniques. Notwithstanding the foregoing, physical restraint is prohibited. So unless they're doing this right here, this part, then physical restraint is also prohibited, and especially when used as a form of discipline and or punishment. Now, this other stuff has to do with fights and being able to break up fights and stuff like that. But I can also tell you that they're supposed to provide you written parental notification when physical restraint's been used within a reasonable time, not to exceed 1 school day from the use of restraint. Guys, this was being done when this first came out. Far more. I rarely see restraint documentation now. Rarely. This rule hasn't changed, guys. The rule's still here. The problem is that schools know that there's no consequence for not doing it. They understand that. So they're like, we're not going to do that. So they will restrain your child, and then you won't know about it. That is also going on and has been going on in the case that I currently have, where we discovered the locking mechanism for this room and how it was being used. So this is the troubling aspect. But you'll see that there's all these reporting requirements. Reporting the use of restraint, documentation, and any prohibited use of seclusion, chemical, to the local board of education annually. Well, I'm sure that has an effect. I'm sure that many of your local board members have no idea that this rule is even in existence. And I'm sure that your local school board members probably have no idea whether or not they're given physical restraint documentation on or the use of seclusion. I don't even know how many of your local school board members, guys, even have a clue that some of these rooms exist. I don't know if they do. But, as far as these locking mechanisms, as far as how these mechanical restraints are used, whether or not people are even CPI or restraint certified or trained, you got to ask your local school board member if they're even aware of this stuff. Because, look, guys, so much is cured through training. Ignorance largely exists, and the responses that come with ignorance, which is typically force, which is typically violence, especially when people have a power differential to where they have government, they have a gun, they have perceived power in the form of their positions. When other than your occasional broken human that's just evil or broken and just love to hurt others, most other people, with regards to their use of that power differential to where they're abusing power, so much of it is just simply rooted in ignorance. That I don't have the information, so therefore, I don't want to get the information, or being ignorantly, confidently ignorant, that somehow they're right in their ignorant decisions, and therefore, when people aren't complying, then they want to sit there and really put some stank on it. And that's where the violence and the use of threat and force come in. All things that can be cured through education, all things that can be cured through additional laws, rules, procedures to sit there and hold these people accountable. I'm not talking about laws that are adopted to sit there and prohibit you as a citizen, as a parent, or laws that further restrict and prohibit your kids. There is a huge difference between the laws I support and the laws that I think that we absolutely need to flush and get rid of in this country. And those are the laws and restrictions against you, the everyday person, the everyday citizen. I want more laws that restrict government. I want more laws that restrict the power of these people to where their ignorance is cured through real tangible consequences. They need to be held accountable, and they don't need to be given immunity for their stupid ass decisions. And that's what's happening in this country. And it's going to continue to happen until all of us continue to go to these board meetings, continue to sit there and demand change. And like I said, change happens through education. And these people need to be educated. And these policies need to be changed. These policies need to be adhered to. But at the same time, we need to put some stank on it as citizens, either to where there's tangible consequences for them not following these rules. Okay? Now, the reason I highlighted this is that also all of this stuff is supposed to be submitted to the Department of Education annually. And I just had a conversation, I don't know, maybe a month ago with some of the representatives. A parent set this up, and I greatly appreciate her doing that, to where I was able to participate in a discussion with the governor's office on some of these things that we have concerns about. And they were like, well, the governor can't. Well, the governor is the head of the Department of Education with regards to the State Board of Education. All right. So she can do something about it with regards to the governor, because she sits at the head of the State Board of Education. And these reports are supposed to be submitted to them. But once again, they never are. And if they are, then I'd love to see them. And I guess that's one of the next steps, is that we can sit there and request them. The next part, this is also very important, guys, as I go down this. This is one of the things that you need to digest and really understand, is that anytime you start seeing things within law that says nothing in this rule shall construe, that means that's the government excusing their behavior. That's the government saying we are protecting this, or that I don't want you to think that you have a right to hold people accountable inside government. That's how you need to read this. Anytime it says nothing in this rule, you see that it doesn't say law, nothing in this rule, because it's not a law, it's a rule. Rules with no consequence. So therefore, it's nothing. Everything you read above about what's prohibited, not prohibited, that we don't want you to do that, this is dangerous, don't do this, this is damaging, it's all nullified and negated by this next section. Watch, and you'll see. Nothing in this rule shall be construed to interfere with the school system, school, or program authority to utilize timeout as defined in the above, or any other classroom management technique or approach, including the student's removal from the classroom. And you sit there and go, well, what do you mean any other classroom management technique? Guys, there you go. Okay, down here, there are other laws, and I've tried to explain this to parents, but it's difficult to do that. But when there are other laws on the books that permit a educator to use a reasonable amount of force to manage their classroom, that's very broad with regards to what that means. It's very broad. So, and what it does is it allows excuses and justifications for people like DHR doing investigations, for police that are doing investigations, because they can sit there and what you do as a parent that you potentially could have your children removed for, or you could be potentially arrested for and charged with a crime, or what you do out in the community. Let's say you call one of these people out. Let's say you beat them up. You would be held to a different standard than these goons. Okay? Why is that? Because they're permitted more authority, more force, more ability to sit there and use physical force and violence against our children. And it's covered because they're government. It's excused because they're government. And so therefore, it's very difficult for me as an attorney working in this area when there are other laws on the books that sit there and conflict with my child's right to a safe environment. I'm not saying, I'm telling you, the majority of teachers and administrators don't behave like this. They don't need these kind of rules. But see, these rules exist not for the good people. The good people don't need rules because common sense comes into play. I don't need most of the laws that are on the books, and neither do you. You know not to drive at an unsafe speed. You know that you need to sit there and stop at a four-way stop. You don't need all of these rules and laws to sit there and dictate how you go about your daily life. A lot of this stuff is nonsense, but it's on the books for no other reason than a mechanism to sit there and control those that can't control themselves. So please understand that I am not throwing good administrators and good teachers and good paraprofessionals under the bus. I am saying that these rules exist for the bad ones. These rules exist for the evil ones, for the broken ones, for the ignorant ones. But that's the problem, is you don't create these rules to sit there and rein in what you know is going to be your bad apples. You know they exist. You know they exist, and it's almost impossible to terminate them because you give them union protection, and they have all of these mechanisms to keep their job. And then on top of it, you give them these outs. You give them these easy outs to sit there to where they're not held accountable. Because nothing in this rule shall be construed. And nothing in this rule modifies the right of the school personnel to use reasonable force as permitted under, these old archaic things from back in the 70s. Because that's what it is. But let's continue, please. Nothing in this rule. Here we go again. With 11, nothing in this rule shall be construed to prohibit a school system from taking reasonable action to diffuse or break up a fight. Nothing in this rule shall be construed to prohibit a school system from taking reasonable action to obtain. See, these two make sense, so I didn't highlight them. But here we go. Nothing in this rule shall be construed to eliminate or restrict the ability of an employee of the school system to use his or her discretion in the use of physical restraint. And that's what I'm scared of. It's not the reasonable people, guys. I am not concerned about the reasonable people. I'm concerned about the unreasonable people. I'm concerned about the ignorant people. I'm concerned about those people that we need to sit there and monitor. And some of them are not being monitored. And we're giving them permission to abuse our kids because we have stupid ass rules like this to where there's nothing in this rules that will eliminate or restrict the ability of the school system for the people to do these things. Nothing in this rule shall be construed to create a criminal offense. Guys, this is such an important part. Nothing in this rule shall be construed to create a criminal offense or a private cause of action, meaning your ability to privately sue against any local board of education or program or its agents or employees. That right there, guys, is the ultimate cover. That nothing in this rule. And it's not just that rule. It's all the rules. Got it? In some instances in which a student is in immediate danger to himself, school or program must determine when it becomes necessary to seek assistance from law enforcement or emergency medical personnel. Nothing in this rule shall be construed to interfere with the duties of law enforcement or emergency medical personnel. And parents must be promptly informed when a student is removed by either or. Okay? That's the end of it. So do you see all the nothing in this rule shall be construed? Nothing in this rule shall be construed. But let me add one more thing, because I have this other part up here. And this was the proposed bill. What I just read to you was the adopted. This was the thing that was passed by the State Board of Education way back in 09 or 10. Okay, so this was the final product. See, this was still the raw sausage, guys. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is this was the proposed rules. And you're sitting there going, how the hell do you have the proposed rules? Well, I have the proposed rules because this was all going on, and we on the parent advocacy side were providing input in what we thought needed to be added to this. Okay, and one of the things that got removed that I wanted to touch on that got removed, got completely removed. It's not in what I just read. Okay, and that is aversives. And that means a physical or sensory intervention program for modifying the behavior of a student which causes or reasonably may be expected to cause one of the following: significant physical harm, such as tissue damage, physical illness or death, serious foreseeable long-term psychological impairment. You see, our State Board of Education decided, and actually the Department of Education, along with it, the people that were there at the time, just didn't feel like aversives needed to be in there. You know, we just don't need to add that. Obvious repulsion on the part of the observers who cannot reconcile extreme procedures with acceptable standard practice. For example, electric shock applied to the body, extremely loud auditory stimuli, forcible introduction of foul substances to the mouth, eyes, ears, nose, or skin, placement in a tub of cold water or shower. Does that sound familiar, some of you out there? Slapping, pinching, pulling hair, blindfolding, or other forms of visual blocking. Unreasonable withholding of meals, which, guys, I find happens frequently. Or denial or reasonable access to toileting facilities, which, believe it or not, I also run into in what I do. Now, you sit there and you go, well, what does aversives have to do with this? Why did they take it out? I don't know. It's a good question for those who make decisions, and that's not me. That's government people, those magic government people that seem to be smarter than all of us, that show up to these board meetings and are ignored. That's a question for the superintendents and all of those guys and women that they need all these mechanisms, and I think that they don't. And so one of the cases that I have currently, the teacher and aide, they're currently on administrative leave while they're being investigated. But one of the things we definitively know is that they were using a spray bottle, a water bottle, to sit there and spray in the face of kids that were stemming, let's say autistic kids that were stemming or flapping their arms or just being generally annoying to these two, to the point where they were using water bottles to spray in the faces of the students in this self-contained classroom. That would be defined as an aversive, okay? That would be defined as an aversive. I mean, you sit there and you go, that's outrageous. It is outrageous. But guys, it happens. I can't tell you how many times that I run across schools. It's becoming more rare. It's becoming more rare. This is the first time, and I'm really shocked at the system that this occurred in. It's more something I see in rural backwoods type of, ignorance. And I'm not saying look, I grew up in a small rural community, but I'm saying that I see it in more places to where there's not ready access to a lot of additional information and training. All right. So I don't mean to offend the rural communities. I love living in rural communities. I believe that, quite frankly, I'm far more willing to hand my kids over to people in rural communities than I am people in urban, suburban environments, just for a variety of reasons. So don't take offense to that. I'm just saying access to the kind of training and resources that exist out there to cure things like ignorance. Because I can tell you that there's a lot of people out there that they do stupid things, but those stupid things, by and large, are rooted in a lack of understanding, a lack of education. The intent isn't there to harm or hurt or injure or maim or psychologically damage. But that's the problem with government, guys, isn't it? Is that when you have that power differential and you have ignorant people that are making decisions or taking action, even if they don't have that intent to do so, cause psychological and emotional harm to people because they're doing it without the proper education and support. So who do I blame for all of this? Well, I blame first and foremost the education systems themselves, the local schools. They should know better. They should provide the kind of training. And this was the other thing I wanted to bring up, because the definition we had in the proposed for seclusion included not capable of leaving due to physical or intellectual incapacity, because even with a door that doesn't lock per se, which if a child has an intellectual incapacity or a physical incapacity to be able to manipulate, let's say, a doorknob, or a doorknob, the place that I'm currently upset at and representing multiple parents, there's not even a damn doorknob on the inside of that padded room. Not even a doorknob. It's just there's no doorknob. There's no doorknob. So whether it has a locking mechanism, whether it doesn't, doesn't matter. There's no doorknob. So you can sit there and close it. And, I guess you can try to kick it open with all your force. But see, this is where this was removed. Not capable of leaving due to physical or intellectual incapacity. Why was that removed? Guys, I think that's very important because, like I said, you can sit there and tell a kid with an intellectual a deficit to go sit in that room to where it because of their limitations they don't get up, they won't try to leave because of those deficit areas. And I don't see that as anything other than criminal. And I don't interpret a child's inability to leave a room on their own volition. I interpret that as false imprisonment. That is a crime. But yet our schools get away with it. Why do they get away with it? They're government. They're government. And so therefore they get away with it. And like I said, it's construed as seclusion and it's prohibited. And, because it's prohibited, and quite frankly, if it's prohibited by these rules, then even though there's no consequence for not following the rule, that would then throw it over to law enforcement because there's no rules that protect them, because that's prohibited. Isolation's prohibited. Seclusion's prohibited. We know that they were using it in this capacity. There's no rule that protects them. So therefore, it would throw it back to law enforcement. And I am highly disappointed in law enforcement in this particular location for their half-ass investigation, their refusal to look at all of the children in the classroom and only focusing on a very, very narrow scope instead of expanding out, understanding that they cannot do what these people have been doing. They cannot do it. And it's been false imprisonment for many of these students that were put in there as a form of punishment with a door that you can't open. So therefore, it should be looked at as false imprisonment. Now, the reason I put this was in the proposed rules once again. So look up here. You see this proposed rules. They remove this. And what this means is that there's nothing in this chapter shall preclude interagency agreements between Departments of Human Resources, which is DHR or CPS, law enforcement, and other state agencies on procedures for investigating reports of suspected child abuse and neglect. Suspected child abuse or neglect within the school, guys, for those that have violated these rules. There is nothing in this chapter to preclude. But see, they removed it. They removed it in the official one right up here that I just read to you. They removed this part. And so I can tell you that this provided them additional cover, because most DHRs will not investigate inside of a school unless law enforcement investigates first and then makes a referral over to DHR that there was suspected child abuse or neglect. I have neglect in that case as well, guys. Neglect. And I don't want to go into some of the details. Not at this point. I might in the future. This is a troubling case. It was allowed to happen. And a lot of it was allowed to happen because of training, but a lot of it was allowed to happen because this school system provided the mechanisms and the means for these people to abuse. For the teacher and this aide to abuse. They provided the equipment in the form of that room with no knob, in the form of the showers that they had in the class. You know, all of these things were used. And to sit there and say, well, we have administrative oversight. Where were you? What was going on? And my thing is, I think you knew. I think you knew. But this is where a lot of these people dehumanize our kids with special needs. And, you sit there and make excuses that we need these tools as though our kids are animals, as though they're not equal and they're not human. And that's repugnant. But I wanted to share that with you. We had that in there to create these interagency, and there's nothing that prohibits them from doing that, guys. There's nothing that prohibits these schools from having agreements with DHR, from having agreements with law enforcement when it comes to internal suspected abuse. The other thing that I'm finding out when I'm talking to some teachers, when I'm talking to some aides, they're not trained. They're mandatory reporters, but they're not trained that as part of their mandatory reporting responsibilities, it includes reporting on themselves. It includes reporting on their employer. It includes those things. It includes reporting on their staff members, even their friends that they work in these close in school environments with. It includes those things. And many of these paras and these teachers have no idea that it includes mandatory reporting on themselves. They think the mechanism is to report it to administration. But I can tell you that most administration, for whatever reason, they just don't interpret things the same way that they somehow interpret and hold parents accountable for. I can't even tell you the stupid crap that they will sit there and report DHR, using it as a tool and a mechanism of control and retaliation against families. They'll report things to DHR against parents. Drop of a hat. Ignore, refuse, don't acknowledge. Now, some of that is because of those rules that I brought up earlier. You sit there and you look at those rules, and they're allowed a lot of latitude with regards to force and control to manage their classroom. Alabama's you can spank in Alabama. Corporal punishment state. So there's a lot of cover there to sit there and excuse your own behavior because you have that power differential, with regards to being able to use aggression and force. And then you excuse it. And then you call yourself human, and you call yourself moral, and you call yourself ethical. and you go to church and you sing in the choir, you pray to Jesus or whatever religion you are, or Gaia, and think that you're, above everybody else, and, in your thought processes, and, you're somehow elevated in your thinking when you're not. Guys, the canary in the coal mine about whether we lose our humanity or not is so much more simple. I judge it based upon how we treat those that are helpless in our society, those that are vulnerable, those that are perceived as weak. That is how I judge our humanity. And our governments have absolutely failed. Some of you want more government because you somehow think that by more government, guys, I am okay with laws as long as a lot of those laws are used to restrict the abuser. And most of our abuse on our society currently is happening by government employees, government people, bureaucrats, politicians. It is a one-sided relationship currently in this country, to where they've given themselves immunity, they've given themselves cover. I don't have immunity. Most of you don't have immunity. You can't sit there and dance in the shadows like this stupid rule that I just read to you. And you sit there and you say, well, where's your humanity? Where's your morality as an individual working within these institutions? I have no idea. I have no idea. I ask myself that all the time. Why aren't the good people within these schools speaking up? Why aren't they saying, yes, I'm seeing things, I see things, that there's people I work with that are engaging. And like I said, it's happening all over the state of Alabama with regards to these rooms, with regards to this. But there's a lot of good people that are silenced and bullied because they've got kids. They've got family. Their kids attend the schools. Retaliation is a real thing. So it's not like I don't understand it. I do understand the immense pressure that a lot of you are under. I do absolutely understand it. What I don't understand are those of you at the top. That's what I don't understand. Only a couple of you at the top. And you know. And when I say the top, I'm talking about heads of schools, heads within the administrative realm. You bully. You don't want to change. You don't want to make these changes. That's where the change has to occur on our side, guys. We have to force this change. And we have to force this change by showing up to these meetings. We have to force this change by getting vocal, running for school board, voting these people out, demanding these people resign, get fired, leave. That's where we are in this country right now, guys. You can't sit on the sidelines anymore. You understand? The system's broken. It can be fixed, but people have to be held accountable. We have to demand education for the people that are running these things, so that there isn't that power differential and the use of these extremist, violent and aggressive and threatening tones toward our kids and toward us as citizens by people wrapped up in themselves and wrapped up in their childish ignorance, confident ignorance. We can't tolerate it anymore. I'm sick of seeing this stuff happening. It weighs on me. And I'm one person, I'm fighting this, and I will not give up. I will not back down. That's just not me. That's not my personality. I don't play games. You don't want to do your job? Well, I'm going to embarrass you. You don't want to do the right thing? I'm going to make you famous. I'm not going to be quiet about this. I'll work with you. I'll work with you, and we'll negotiate solutions. And we can even do that quietly. But it all depends on how you respond to me. But if you're not doing your job, if you're not committed to substantial changes to prevent things like this from happening over and over and over and over again, then no. Then I've got to take a different approach. And that different approach involves a spotlight and a lot of sanitation. Things can't happen in the dark, and they can't happen in shadows. That's what I love about the antiseptic nature of bright UV lights and sunlight. It has a renewal effect on things, and it cleans things. I don't like stagnation. Like I said, this isn't a swampy marsh anymore. We're going to make the water flow. We're going to break things up. Things have got to change.